Hello and welcome to another episode of Ontario Permaculture. I'm Misty Murph'Ariens. This episode we're going to just show you around the garden what we're doing in the early gardening season, which for us is about from April into late May. Right now, today it's the end of May and I'm in the food forest right now, just enjoying some of the lovely wildlife. We want to talk about some of the staples that we go to, including this beauty, and some of the work that we get up to here around the farm, and just generally give you a tour around all of the food producing gardens here in Ultima Thule. So let's go take a look. Here we enter the food forest from the north side, closest to the house. You can see already that the gardens are quite full for this time of year in a northern climate. Most gardeners in our area are just setting out their plants this weekend or even the weekend following this one, which means that the ground in an annual garden would be quite bare at this time of year in our particular region. But here you can see that there are lots of things. The ground is quite covered and there are many layers to the garden. You can see the leaves have barely begun to leaf out, but the ground is quite covered and everything that you can see is an edible. So all of the ground cover is our early springtime vegetables. Here we're looking at some hawthorn, which I use as a medicinal tea for my blood pressure. These are on my special sacred gardens of Mother and Father, where I take occasional contemplation. The dark green foliage you see with the purple flowers is violet, and that is one of our favorite springtime edibles. It just grows and grows like a champ. It is nice and short and tidy in the springtime, and not only do the leaves make a wonderful spinach substitute for both cooked and raw applications, but the flowers are delightfully flavored lightly of green pepper. Another item we make a lot of use of in the spring is daylily. You'll see it as the spear-shaped leaves that are on both sides of the garden here. It's an onion relative, and we use its shoots in the early spring for soups, and later on the flowers as a lettuce substitute. Here we're looking at cherry blossoms that have recently been fertilized and are turning into cherries. You'll see we have lots of rhubarb in our garden, and while we don't make much use of it anymore, it does grow very well. This is sea buckthorn. I can highly recommend this lovely nitrogen fixing shrub, not only for its prolific orange berries that will come on later in the summer, but these lovely leaves that can be used as a green tea substitute and is quite nourishing. Here we're just looking at my beautiful moo man. We've got some apple trees. The romance cherries are so beautiful in blossom. You also see hazelnuts to the center of the food forest and lots of currant bushes. Here in the cherry garden, we've got beneath it more of those lovely violets. There are quite a lot, but if you think of using salad greens every day, you do use quite a lot. Here we have chives, something we also make a lot of use of, both because it grows very well here and it repels pests beautifully. We've got our haskaps, the yellower leaves in the front, cherry blossoms, lots of comfrey in the midst of the garden for chop and drop fertilizer. Here we see a pear tree and in the distance some plum trees. We're in zone 5B, so we pretty much tried every kind of fruit that will grow in our zone, and we've settled on the things that thrive. This is the kitchen garden, as we call it, which is the space that we keep in most annual garden. I say mostly annual because I let the annuals self-seed in there and I pre-seed the season before. So it is empty in the spring and doesn't look like much, but in a mere month it looks very full. Around the house, we have mostly strawberries and herbs. In the kitchen garden, I grow most of the staple items that require a lot of sun, including our tomatoes. Here we have lettuce seeded down. Here we have another secondary kale crop to succeed the overwintered kale crop. Here we have our peppers and basil, and in the back, my good old favorite, Magenta Spreen. Here it's mixed in with quite a few radishes of a variety of different kinds, French radishes, wasabi radishes, horseradish, and things like that. Radish is a wonderful reseeding annual. As you can see, it's got beautiful flowers later in the season. The flowers are edible as sort of a rapini, broccolini sort of food, and the leaves are so spicy and delicious in salads. As you can see, the Magenta Spreen really makes itself at home, which means you can use tons of it. Another thing that grows great in our climate is black currant. So anytime we're running an annual bed, we're always transitioning it over to a future food forest by lining the edges with perennials. There's a glorious Sir Frolic once again, and his lovely Lady Moo, Miss Minnie Moo. The center part of this bed we ran as an experiment by seeding it in the fall, last fall, and then covering it with a children's play climbing dome and covering that with a clear tarp, which kept the snow load off and allowed a few extra growing days over the fall and in the early spring, giving us beautiful spring access to kale and radish, some cabbages, and other winter hardy things like that. Overall, we highly recommend covering a portion of your garden in the autumn and seeding down some winter hardy things. You will be rewarded. Here we see some romance cherries that have self-seeded themselves over the fence. And I just wanted to take the moment to point out that food forests have a wonderful strategy because they're so self-replacing. Every fruit that you accidentally miss and quite a number of the fruits that end up going to the birds end up getting replanted. But they don't always end up exactly where you want them. They mean that you have ample transplants for other gardens, so you can always be expanding. This is the garden right in front of the house, and we walk this path numerous times a day, which is why I put my strawberries in it, A, so that they get wonderful weeding and tending because I'm seeing them often, but B, so that I can actually pick and eat the strawberries when they're ripe because I see them. These gardens are kind of overflow, so we use them to hold species that we have an abundance of in the food forest. And we don't prioritize food crops as strongly here because we end up walking a cow down this path every single day. Now, I wanted to point this out because the cow does graze her way across it every single day. And so these species have been selected to be things that are not too poisonous for her, but also not so attractive that she would mow them down to absolute nothing every single day. And so I wanted to point out that these are nice species to have in highly deer populated areas, in that cows and deer like to graze similar things. So things like hostas and dead nettle or lamian. The black currants fill in a lot of spaces. Here we have my holy grove, and this is where I situate most of the medicinal herbs that I have. Things that are not every day going into food but are very useful to have. For example, mugwort and wormwood. Because this is a forested and shady part of the garden, I take this opportunity to grow things that only like to grow in forest soil. You can see there's quite a few coltsfoot there. You can see trilliums, which is the flower of Ontario. And we also grow our wild leeks and fiddleheads in this area. This brings me to one of our favorite plants in the garden, which is usually referred to as garlic mustard and is considered invasive. I can see why, because it is very robust and it has a very good reproduction strategy. But in my books, if that's an edible, that means that should be a pot herb. That means that you should be eating so much of it that you can keep up with its reproduction. Because ultimately what we're trying to achieve is that the garden regrows itself. This here is our dryland hugelkultur. We bring our surplus compost and bedding down here to compost in windrows. Last year we brought a row down, and now it is what you see is all the greenery. All of that greenery is surplus edibles, and the soil is just mellowing to be able to be planting perennials in. Most of these edibles self-seeded, and this is what we're after, is to create a bunch of spaces that will seed things that are good foodstuffs so that we basically can forage as if it's the wild, but with a inexhaustible supply of vegetables. All spring we were hauling down the compost piles, and now we're going to run the chickens in a chicken tractor over it to peck and scratch and benefit from all the worms, and then the soil should mellow for next year's planting. Here we come to the Chinampa, and there isn't much going on in the springtime because it is kept in a somewhat annual state, but the main work of the Chinampa is in building up new ones. So basically all spring, Bryce has been back and forth with biomass to build up the tops of the Chinampa islands, and I have been in the stream mucking up the lovely organic soil that is at the base, thereby opening up the stream for aquatic life and using the high-quality soil for growing vegetables on top of the chinampas. For a deeper dive into the details of the chinampas, watch for a future video where we'll show them in full production and give you a little bit more specifics about the species that we like to plant there.
Hi friends, I'm Bryce Murph'Ariens. I just wanted to take a second to say thank you to each and every one of you out there who've taken the time to stop and support us through our GoFundMe, through our Patreon. And I wanted to very specifically say a big thank you to our Patreon supporters who have very graciously helped us at this point by buying a gimbal. And we will be using this gimbal in future to make a smooth flow for all of our shots. And I hope that this will make it much more enjoyable for each and every one of you out there who are watching. And I hope you come back to watch what we have, because we have a lot more in store and we're really excited to share it with you. So we'll see you in our next video. Oh, wow. I was trying to do a silent film and I see what you're pulling.
Oh, thumbs.
Naturally. I always look over here when you're bent over. My timing.
It's an easy guess because it's about 50% of the time.
That's a good point.